just joined, we were talking about the old-fashioned cartoons, you know, going back 40 years ago. Tom and Jerry, Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy. When cartoons were made to be funny, to be goofy, to be, you know, weird like that. Well, you just go from one laugh to the other. And it was about making people laugh. Then, I don't know, 20 years ago, the cartoon industry started making more serious cartoons. You know, cartoons like Little Mermaid, things like that, you know, Little Mermaid and others. There's been others that are more dramatic, even to the point that I've seen science fiction cartoons. They're cartoons, but they have more adult themes, like science fiction and things like that. The old-fashioned cartoons, yeah, I'm going to give you a couple of words for you to remember, right? Because these words will help you to understand what you're watching and what you're reading. And those words are protagonist and antagonist. And I'll write them down. Protagonist like that. Protagonist. And the other one is antagonist. Protagonist and antagonist. Does anybody know what these two words are? Does anybody know? Protagonist and antagonist. Okay, so protagonist is the main character.
I think I know.
You know? And who is this talking?
Maybe like the protagonist is like the good people in the story, and antagonist is like the bad people in the story.
Yeah, a lot of times. And I would say that 90% of the time, the protagonist is the main character. The main character. He's the main character. And he's usually a good guy. He's usually a good guy. And then the antagonist is the bad guy. However, that's not the case all the time. That's not the case all the time. And it's not the case all the time because you have this thing called, this idea called anti-hero. Now I'm going to write it down. Anti, like this, with a hyphen, and then hero. All right. And the anti-hero is actually the protagonist of a story because he or she is the main character. The main character. However, even though that person is the main character, that person is not a hero. That person is actually a bad person. And there are many movies like that, you know, many movies like that, and many stories like that. And I mean, I can think of a lot of them. For instance, Pirate of the Caribbean. If you ever saw Pirate of the Caribbean, in which you have this one pirate, and he's a bad guy, you know. He is. He's a thief. He is a pirate. However, he is the protagonist. He is the main character. The action follows him around all over the place. And he does bad things, but the audience kind of likes him. They kind of like him. So you can have a protagonist who is an anti-hero. Not a hero, but the opposite of the hero. So remember that. Now, and like that one, I mean, there's so many. I mean, I don't even want to mention them. The Accountant, that's another one, where this one guy who is an accountant, but as a sideline, he is a hitman. He kills people for money, and but he puts on a front that he's a good guy, right? The Accountant, he's an anti-hero. He's an anti-hero because even though the action follows him and he's a bad guy, but he is the protagonist. Now, the antagonist in a story can be a good guy or a bad guy. The antagonist, most of the time, 90% of the time, like I told you, is a bad guy, just like the hero of the story, you know, the protagonist. An antagonist is usually a bad guy because the antagonist is trying to stop the protagonist from accomplishing his or her goals. Whatever the protagonist is trying to do, the antagonist is there to antagonize them, to make it difficult for him or her to do what he's supposed to do, right? However, when do you have a protagonist and an antagonist, where the protagonist is an anti-hero and the antagonist is actually the good guy? Usually detective stories. You see them in detective stories a lot. In other words, you have a bank robber and he goes into banks and he robs the bank. But the movie is about him. The movie is about how it is that he robs bank, and you know, the movies, maybe he falls in love with a girl, and you know, and they show good sides of him. They show that maybe, you know, the human side of him. But still, no, he's a bad guy. He robs bank. So he's the protagonist, and we're going to call that a P for protagonist. And then the antagonist, and we're going to say it's an A for antagonist, so that I don't have to write the whole word. The antagonist is a detective who is chasing the bank robber. He's a detective who is chasing the bank robber and trying to catch him. So in this case, you have a protagonist who is the anti-hero, and you have an antagonist who is actually a righteous person, a good person, because he's just a detective trying to do his job. Well, Alan, you're mentioning a very interesting author, Agatha Christie. And I'm trying to think here if Agatha Christie, you know, probably Murder in the Orient Express could be one where we could say that that the good people were the bad people, maybe. But there's another one that I'm thinking about. It's called Point Break. Give me a second, please. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. It's called Point Break, and it has Keanu Reeves in it. And Keanu Reeves is a detective. He's actually an FBI agent. And his job is to go undercover and find out who is robbing banks. There's a gang of bank robbers, and they're running around through California. And they're actually all surfers. They're surfers. They like to go on the water and surf with their surfboards. But on the side, as a way for them to be able to afford a life of surfing, they go out and they rob banks. So now, and the movie is really about the bank robber, the one main gang leader who is the bank robber. And then sort of as the antagonist, the one trying to catch him is Keanu Reeves. And he plays this one guy, and he catches them. He eventually catches them. So when you said, Alan, Agatha Christie, I'm trying to think if there was an Agatha, and I've read most of her books. Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile. Well, there's so many. She wrote so many. I can't really remember if there is a clear anti-hero in her novels. I don't know. Maybe you can think of one, because the novels that I have read had Detective Clouseau, the guy with a big mustache. And if you've seen the movie, and even if you read the book, she describes Detective Clouseau as a guy with a big mustache, and he's very meticulous, and he's very intelligent, but he's always at the center of attention. He's always the protagonist. And then there's a bad guy who is the antagonist, but she always paints the bad guy as a really bad, ugly guy, In Murder on the Orient Express, the 12 people that were in the train killed the bad guy. But then Detective Clouseau lets him go. He figures they did the right thing. So she does throw a twist into things, but I can't remember one. I don't know, maybe if you think of one, you let me know. You might be able to think of one. I don't remember one where there's a clear protagonist who was a bad guy and the antagonist being the detective chasing the protagonist. But I might be wrong because I can't think of everything. Now, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, we do have a clear protagonist, right? Who is the antagonist in Miss Frisbee?
The main character, I think, is Mr. Frisbee.
Well, Mr. Frisbee died. Remember that Mrs. Frisbee is a widow. And Mr. Frisbee, her husband, died.
No, Mr. Frisbee.
Mr. Frisbee? You're
Yes.
talking about Mrs. Frisbee's husband? Because she's a widow. Remember that. He died before the story begins. Could it be the farmer? Could he be the bad guy? Not the owl. The owl helps Mrs. Frisbee. And there's a whole bunch of other characters that help Mrs. Frisbee. Mrs. Frisbee, yeah, Lawson, they're totally right. Mrs. Frisbee is the main character. The farmer, maybe, yeah. Maybe, like Gray says, the farmer is the antagonist. Maybe. I don't know. I think we can answer that question as we move on through the, so think about it. Think about these two words that I gave you, right? Think about these two words and think about the story. We know that Mrs. Frisbee is the protagonist. She's the good person in this whole thing. And even though the owl is a really ugly looking character and mean and eats mice, and we don't even know how he let her get away with going into his house and him not eating her. For some reason, he liked her. I don't know. He actually helped her. So he's not really the antagonist. Maybe. All right, let's leave that as an open question. How's that? Let's leave it as an open question and let's see if we can sort of figure this out as we sort of go along. Now, here is another question for you. And this is a question for the end, more towards the end. And we have the word plot. Plot. What does the word plot mean? Does anybody know what the word plot?
Events or order of events,
Yeah,
like the structure of the story.
yeah, absolutely. What the story is about, right? Now, what the story is about. So we kind of know what the story is about, right? It's about rats that are really smart because they come from this NIM organization or department, you know. But now, let's say that there are different types of plots, right? There are different types of plots. And there are plots, all plots have action. They have action in them. They have some sort of action, right? They have a rhythm to them. They have a rhythm to them. And so all plots, let's do it this way. So all plots have action, and the action moves in a certain way. The action moves in a certain way. Sometimes the action starts here and goes down. Bad things begin to happen. And then you can't just have bad things happen because then it's not really interesting, right? The person writing the story is going to say, oh, I want people to enjoy themselves. So you can't just have Billy Smith goes to school and he gets hit by a truck and then he is on a wheelchair forever and then he dies. That's not very interesting. Well, let's say that Billy Smith gets out of
There's a
school.
conflict.
What's that?
There's a conflict, which is the problem. It's called conflict.
That's
And
right.
then there's a solution, which is the solution for the problem.
Very good. That's part of the action. You're totally correct. That's part of the action. All right. So let's talk hypothetically about this. Billy Smith gets hit by a truck, but then he gets better. And then he goes back to school and he learns a lot and he becomes a millionaire, right? That's one plot. That's one action. Goes down and then goes up again. And then he lives happily ever after, right? Now, what about a plot where Billy is moving along happily, going to college, having a great time, improving his life, but then all of a sudden something happens to him and he goes really low, and then he climbs back up again, and then he lives happily ever after, or the opposite, where he goes up and then he goes down and then bad things happen to him and that's it, right? So, and we're going to keep that word that you said, conflict. We're going to keep conflict over here, right? We're going to keep it because that's a good word. And we're going to talk about conflict and a solution.
What about the solution?
Yeah, and a solution to the conflict, right? So we're going to keep those two words. We're going to keep them. Those are very two good words. You know, that's another one. That's another situation that could happen, right? That's another situation that could happen. Let's talk about, like, for instance, let's talk about Cinderella. How do you think the action, the plot, the action of the plot moves in Cinderella? She starts out real low, right? Doesn't she? She's all the way down here. She lives with her stepmother and stepsisters, and they abuse her all the time. And she's very unhappy. But then a fairy godmother appears to her one day and takes all these animals and makes them into something, right? Some animals, the rats, the fairy godmother made them into horses, and the pumpkin, the fairy godmother made the pumpkin into a carriage. And then she takes clothing and puts it on Cinderella, and puts on these glass slippers that were like beautiful glass slippers. And there's a ball. There's a big party. Yeah, I skipped a bit. All right, Lawson, tell me, what did I skip? Tell me. Yeah, you think? Go ahead.
I think there was this party, and then Cinderella didn't get to go to the party while her family went to it because her family wasn't kind to Cinderella.
No. She's the one that goes to the party. No, she finds the fairy godmother, dresses her up and all this stuff, and she goes to this ball. It's called a ball, B-A-L-L. It's a party where the royal family was giving the party, right? The prince was there. And Cinderella goes and dances with the prince and falls in love with the prince. Now, the fairy godmother said, you have to be home
Teacher,
before
you
midnight.
skipped
Yeah.
a bit.
Okay, tell me the story.
That at first, Cinderella, I think she saw her saw the have the clothes, and but she can't get the permission to go to the ball. And
but how did she
and
get to the
she
ball?
is like a bit sad, but then
How did
but
she get to
then
the ball? But she did get to the ball, right? But do
yeah,
you remember
after
the
that
part?
her
Do you remember the part where the fairy godmother said you got to be home before 12? Otherwise,
that's after
well, yeah,
the-
but almost 12, she
her-
realized it and she left the ball. She went running. She left her ball
Mhm.
running, and as she was running out of the ball, she left one slipper behind, one glass slipper.
yeah, and
Right. So she goes home and her life becomes really bad again. But now, in the meantime, the prince is looking for her, and he starts looking at all the women in the kingdom for someone who had delicate little feet that would fit inside of the glass slipper. And he finds her. He finds her, and then he marries her. And then she lives happily ever after. But what I'm trying to show you is that plots have a way of rising, falling, rising again. Sometimes they rise and fall. Sometimes they fall and rise, right? So the plot, and why am I saying this is because we need to figure out, and this is the big question here, we need to figure out a couple of things about Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. Number one, the plot, does it rise? Does the plot fall? Does it rise again? What happens to the plot, right? What happens to the plot? But then there's also something very important that we need to find out, right? And that is the other words that someone gave us. that somebody gave us. And those are two very important words, and that is conflict and solution to the conflict. What are the conflicts in Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH? And I'm not going to say anything right now. I'm not going to tell you. I want you to figure it out. I want you to tell me what those conflicts are. Number one,
I have
want
an answer.
the plot, right? I want you
I
to
have an answer.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Repeat.
I think Mr. Frisbee has to move to a new house, move to their summer house before the plow comes.
The plot.
When she asks the owl suggests her to go and ask the rats. The rats moved her house to the shelter of the stone, which in the story is said to be the lee of the stone.
Very good. All right. So we saved those two words, right? Conflict and solution. And we also saved the idea of a plot going up and going down or whatever. So we're going to try, as we listen to the lecture, as we listen to the lesson, we're going to try to think about that. And then at the end, or at least maybe next week or next class, we're going to try to figure it out. We're going to try to figure out that mystery. What is it? And I depend on you guys to tell me, because I don't want to do it all by myself here. I want you to help me out with this. I want you to help me out with this. Okay, so let's start. So let's pick it up where we left last time. And last time we left right here. We were talking about Robert Conley, married Sally McClaslin, and all that stuff. And that's where we left it. So let's pick it up here. And you guys help me out. You help me out if you see something that we need to be aware of. If we see something that tells us about the plot, that tells us about the conflict, that tells us about the solution, right? That tells us about all of that. So let's pick it up. Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH, the background. Robert Leslie Conley was enjoying a career as a senior editor in the employ of National Geographic magazine. And this was back when that magazine, oh, wait a minute. I think we did did we do 2 lessons? I'm kind of lost here. Yeah, we did. We didn't leave it there. We left it here. Oh, I'm sorry about that. We left it here with Nicodemus. Explained that he and his friend Jenner discovered a bag of food one day and were captured by scientists who took them to the laboratory at the National Institute of Mental Health. There, the rats were given experimental shots that gave them the ability to read, write, and operate complex machinery. A rat named Justin figured out how to open the door of his cage, and then we know the story. They all escaped and all this crazy stuff. That's where we left it. I'm sorry. Okay, so let's start over again. The escape rats have come up with a plan, a grand scheme to form their own farming colony so that they would no longer have to steal food from humans. Jenner, however, disapproved of the plan and left with a group of other rats who felt the same way. The rats commence with their plan to move Mrs. Frisbee's home, which I think one of you was talking about. Since Mr. H's has a broken leg, Mrs. Frisbee volunteers to be the one to dash to Dragon's bowl and drug it. Oh my God, they put drug into the cat's bowl. While she's doing this, however, she's captured and locked in a bird cage by the farmer's son, Billy. While inside the Fitzgibbons' home, Mrs. Frisbee, Pierre, yeah, you raised your hand. Go ahead, talk to me. Tell me, what do you?
There it was actually one of the farmers, one of his Gibbon songs.
Ah, okay. All right. Anyway, so while inside the Fitzgibbons' home, Mrs. Frisbee overhears them talking about an incident in which a group of rats was electrocuted at a nearby hardware store while trying to steal a motor. Electrocuted, you know, that means electricity running through their bodies, and then they like that, and then they die, right? Mr. Fitzgibbon reveals that the incident has attracted the attention of a group of men who have offered to exterminate the rats living on his property for free. I guess he comes in and he says, I'll get rid of those rats. You don't even have to pay me. They're a pest. They're vermins. We got to get rid of them. Right? Something like that. That night, after the Fitzgibbons have gone to bed, Justin frees Mrs. Frisbee from the bird cage and helps her escape from the farmer's house. The rats successfully move the Frisbee's house to the other side of the rock using a complex pulley and scaffolding system. Wow, big words. I don't know if you know what a pulley is and what a scaffolding system is, but I'm going to draw you a picture. A pulley is one big large gear like this. And sometimes, not all the time, it has a smaller gear. But you have a rope, and the rope wraps itself around this gear and under the other one. And then you can bring that rope somewhere. Let's say you have, let's do it this way here. Let's say you have a big rock over here, hypothetically speaking. You have a big rock. And you want to bring the rock all the way up to this. And let's say that there's a building and you want to bring it up to the 7th floor of the building. So you set the pulley up on the roof of the building and you send the rope down, they tie the rock to it, and then they have like a handle, and you crank the handle like that, crank it and crank it and crank it, and you slowly lift the rock. Scaffolding, on the other hand, is, I don't know if you've ever seen painters. All right, so here's a building like this. Here are the windows of the building, right? Let's say. And you got a bunch of guys who are painting the building. They're painting the building. But the building is high. So how do you get up there? So what you do is you take ropes and you put the ropes down and you take a platform, like a wooden plank or a wooden platform, and you put it here, right? And this is called a scaffold. Now, sometimes scaffolds are placed on top of a ladder. You get 2 ladders like this, and you take a plank and you put it here, and the 2 ladders are holding onto the plank, and then you can walk. You can walk here on top of it. And that's how, by the man walking on top of this plank, they can go back and forth and paint the building, right? That's what's called a scaffolding or a scaffold. This is called a scaffold or scaffolding. And a pulley is that rope that has a gear with a handle. And as you crank the handle, you can lift something. So what this shows is that these rats, man, they knew how to use machinery. They became so intelligent that they're able to do,
They're civilized.
yeah, they're able to do some really important things, right? They're really, they can do things that only humans can do. So Mrs. Frisbee tells the rats about the conversation she overheard and warns them that a group of men are coming to exterminate them. The rats believe that the men are the scientists from Nim who had kidnapped them in the first place. In order to fool the exterminators, the rats destroy all traces of technology and litter their home with garbage to make it look like a normal rat's hole. But unbeknownst to the men, these are not normal rats. These are nowhere near normal rats. Most of the rats then move to Thorn Valley, where they plan to establish their farming colony. But 10 stay behind so that their home won't appear to be deserted. Wow, they're really smart, aren't they? The exterminators fill the hole with poisonous gas, killing 2 of the rats. But the others manage to escape through a back exit. Meanwhile, Timothy is able to recover in peace before the Frisbees move to their summer home. So anyway, so as we think of the plot, how is the plot moving? Is the action of the plot rising? Is it falling? Is it beginning to fall? Is it going through some ups and downs? And where are the conflicts? And where are the solutions to the conflicts? You need to think about that. Now, just think about it, right? Just think about it. And then at the end, you can tell me what your thoughts are. The main themes of the novel are family, home, sacrifice, community, and society building, independence, technology, and environmentalism. Now, here's another word for you. Here's another word that you have to, kind of remember, right? And the word is theme. Theme. What does the word theme mean?
The message the author wants to send through this story.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Very good. The message that the author. I realized, let me see, Pierre says, I realized that Nim is real after reading the whole book. Oh, okay. Very good. Very good. So anyway, wow. So the theme, the message that the author wanted to bring out is family. Mrs. Nim, her kids, the family, everybody is a family. Home. What happens to us if we lose our homes? Can you imagine that? But also sacrifice. 2 of the rats sacrificed themselves so that they could fool the humans. They gave up their lives for the betterment, for the welfare of the other rats that were part of the community. Community, society building. Create a society. but also independence. And also technology. There's a lot of technology here. Low-level technology, high-level technology, chemistry, all of that stuff. But also, very important, especially in today's age, environmentalism. How do we deal with the environment? How do we deal with global warming? How do we deal with pollution, right? So that's very important, very relative. The novel has been praised for using animals to convey a larger message about science, the nature of intelligence, and the destruction of the environment. This is very important. And you know, one that I like is the nature of intelligence. What is intelligence? How do we know that we are smart?
Smartness?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it something like smart?
Yeah, it's like being smart. How do we know? How do we know that we're smarter than someone else? What makes us be smart? That we can solve problems? Is that what intelligence is about? Solving problems? Solving
Being
conflict?
civilized and being able to think complex things?
Right, right. Think creatively, right? Think creatively. Critical thinking, right? Critical thinking. Critical thinking is when we look at a problem and we try to analyze it and we come up with solutions to the problem, right? Critical thinking. But also the destruction of the environment. We're destroying our environment. And we need to, we need to stop it. The rats in the story are a parable for scientific progress and innovation and the power that comes with knowledge. The power that comes with knowledge. Reception. In a retrospective essay about the Newbery medal-winning books from 1966 to 1975, children's author John Rowe Townsend wrote, "It seems to me that the fact that all the animals talk, anthropomorphism, personification, remember, we were talking about a lot of words here that give us a lot of different concepts, right? Personification. Fact that all the animals talk and behave intelligently from the beginning of the story detracts from the spectacular development of the laboratory rats." And that's the big one. Has anybody ever seen Planet of the Apes? Has anybody ever seen that movie? It's a science fiction movie. And it's a movie where these guys get into a spaceship, and they go into outer space. And, they get this time loop where they're out there for 100,000 years. And when they come back to Earth, they're still the same because everybody on Earth has aged, but not them because, the theory of relativity and all that stuff. And when they land back on Earth, they see that monkeys, apes, are now able to talk. It's called Planet of the Apes. Very interesting movie. Planet of the Apes. So if you ever get a chance, see it, because of the apes. Planet of the Apes. This is a situation in which monkeys were in a laboratory and they were experimenting on them. And they also gave them drugs. And then it affected their brains and they started learning. And they actually took over. They took over the governments. They took over everything and they kicked out the humans. And then only the apes, only the monkeys ran the world. The monkeys only ran the world. So when these astronauts come back to Earth, boom, they come back. They find an Earth that is totally changed. Here's the Earth. It's totally changed. Apes can talk. They dress. They put on uniforms. They have armies. So this idea that animals can maybe one day be intelligent. Wow. I wonder if that could ever really happen. And here's another question for you. What do you think? Could that ever happen? Could that ever happen? If you ever see Planet of the Apes, I'm telling you, that it's a scary movie because you see these apes that talk. And the director of the movie used these costumes. They put people, the actors, inside of these costumes. And they look so realistic because they moved their mouth and everything, you know, and they spoke. And there were different monkeys, different apes that would do different things. Some of the apes were soldiers. Some of the apes were scientists, doctors, teachers, you know. Really weird, really, really, really weird. And then because there are different types of apes, you know, you got orangutans and you got gorillas and you got chimpanzees. And then on the monkey side, you got other different types of monkeys, spider monkeys and, you know, whatever. They all had their place in society. Some were higher in society than others. Some apes were workers and the other ones were the ones that managed things, managed companies, managed the army, and stuff like that. So it's like a human world, but now controlled by apes, Planet of the Apes. And they made several of these. They made about 4 or 5 of these movies because they were so popular, so incredibly popular. But anyway, something to think about. Something to think about. Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim is a pleasing book, but I find it mildly frustrating, said this guy Townsend. It might have been something more than it is. Maybe he didn't see the real, you know, the real stuff about it, right? He didn't really understand it. Now, there's been adaptations of the book. Adaptations mean that cartoons, movies, you know, whatever. One was 1982, the 1982 version. In 1982, the animated film, The Secret of Nim, was released, which is the one we've been watching, directed by Don Bluth. The film adds a mystical element completely absent from the novel, with Nicodemus portrayed as a wise, bearded old wizard with magic powers and an enchanted amulet rather than an equal of the other rats. The character of Jenner is made a villain who is still present with the rats rather than having left them before the story begins. The crow Jeremy has much greater prominence as comic relief, right? He gets all tied up in that rope in the movie, not in the book, in the film than he has in the book. Additionally, the Frisbee family's name was changed to Brisby to avoid trademark infringements with the Frisbee. So, you know, they even changed that a little bit. And then there was a reboot in July 2009. Paramount Pictures set Neil Berger to write the script and Cary Grant to produce the film based on the book. On March 4th, 2015, MGM which is a big company in Hollywood, which had released the 1982 film, acquired the rights to the book to adapt it into a live action animated film. Michael Berg was set to adapt it, while Daniel Booker and Aaron Kruger would produce it. On April 10th, 2019, it was announced that the Russo brothers will be executive producers of the remake. On October 8th, 2021, just recently, it was announced that a television series based on the book was in development at the Fox as an event series. So they're even going to make, think about that. This is such an interesting story that they're even going to make a series, right? Where every week you pick it up, something else happens. So that's really very, very interesting. So I think we're going to leave it here for next time. So let's see what you guys have to say about all of this. Oh, I'll have a class. Okay, no problems, Peter. Because we're finished with the class. Let me put here chapter 3, or rather class number 3. And in the meantime, as you think about this, why don't you just put that up here like this. Class number 3. Think about it and tell me what you think. What do you think? What do you think the plot is going to be like? Is it going to go up and down, up and down? How do they encounter conflict? How do they solve the conflict? Who is the real antagonist? We know Mrs. Frisbee is the protagonist. Are there other protagonists? What type of a person is Mrs. Frisbee? The typical mother?
The rat, I think, is another of the main characters.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. So anyway, very interesting. And also, that's why I was showing the other cartoons, just so that you see the difference. So that you see the way cartoons used to be. I like the old cartoons. I think they're funny. I laugh like crazy when I watch Tom and Jerry. I love Tom and Jerry. I love those guys. But I wanted you to see the difference and think about the difference and think how much of a serious book this is, even though it's for children. Okay, so we're going to leave it here. We're going to pick it up right here. But think about it. Think about it for next time. Think about what's going on here. What is going on? Who's who? What's what? Protagonist, antagonist, the plot, rising action, falling action. Right? Let's think about all of that and we'll talk about it. But until then, what do we say at the end of the class? See you later, alligator. See you later, alligator.